March 23, 1945. Western Germany. The bridge wasn't supposed to be destroyed. According to intelligence, the Germans had retreated so quickly, they hadn't had time to demolish the crossing. The bridge was intact, ready to use, critical for the Allied advance into the heart of Germany. But when the advance scouts reached the river at dawn, they found nothing. No bridge, just twisted steel and broken concrete jutting from the water like broken teeth. The Germans had blown it after all, probably hours earlier, maybe less. Lieutenant Thomas Keating stood at the riverbank, staring at the wreckage, doing calculations in his head that kept coming out wrong. Keating was an engineer, combat engineer, 26 years old, trained to build things under impossible conditions, bridges, roads, fortifications. But this was different. The river was wide, 70 yards across, fast-moving, cold, deep enough that swimming it with equipment was suicide. And on the other side, the entire advance waited. 3 infantry divisions, artillery units, supply convoys, thousands of men and vehicles all stuck because one bridge was gone. The division commander, Colonel Harrison, stood beside Keating. How long to build a replacement? Keating looked at the river, at the current, at the demolished bridge remnants. Standard pontoon bridge? Maybe 3 days, if we had the materials. We don't have 3 days. The Germans are regrouping. Every hour we wait gives them time to fortify. Yes, sir. How fast can you do it? Keating looked at Harrison. Sir, building a bridge that can support tanks and vehicles over a 70-yard span takes time. We need pontoons, decking, anchor cables. Lieutenant, I'm not asking for a perfect bridge. I'm asking how fast you can get my division across that river. Keating was silent, because Harrison was asking for something that shouldn't be possible. A bridge, built in hours instead of days, with whatever materials they could scrounge. Strong enough to hold not just infantry, but vehicles, maybe even light tanks. It was impossible. But Keating had learned over 2 years of combat engineering that impossible just meant no one had figured it out yet. 48 hours, Keating said. Harrison stared at him. You just said 3 days. I said 3 days for a standard bridge. But if we improvise, use the wreckage, salvage what's left, build something lighter, maybe 48 hours. Maybe. Probably, sir. Harrison studied him. If you can do it, you'll save this entire offensive. If you can't, we're stuck here while the Germans dig in. Understood, sir. Then get to work. Harrison walked away. Keating stood at the riverbank, staring at the destroyed bridge, trying to figure out how to build something that physics said shouldn't exist. What Keating didn't know yet, what he couldn't have anticipated, was that the next 48 hours would push every limit he thought he had. Not just physical, but mental. The ability to see solutions where none existed, to improvise with materials that weren't meant for bridge building, and to convince 200 men to trust that his impossible plan would work. Who was Thomas Keating? Thomas Andrew. Keating was born in 1919 in upstate New York, not in a city, in a small town where the main industry was a paper mill that had been running since before the Civil War. His father worked at the mill, maintenance supervisor, the kind of job where you fixed things that couldn't be replaced because replacing them was too expensive. So you improvised, made do, found solutions with whatever was available. Thomas grew up watching his father solve problems that shouldn't have solutions. A gear that wouldn't mesh, his father would file it by hand until it fit. A bearing that was worn out, he'd manufacture a replacement from scrap metal and machine it himself. A conveyor system that kept breaking. His father would redesign it, not with blueprints, but with chalk on the floor and instinct earned from 20 years of keeping machines running. Thomas learned early that engineering wasn't about perfection, it was about function. Did it work? Did it solve the problem? That was all that mattered. He was good at math, better than good. By high school, he was tutoring seniors while still a sophomore. His teachers said he should go to college, study engineering properly. But Thomas's family couldn't afford it. So after graduation, he went to work at the mill. Same as his father, same as everyone else. He expected to spend his life there. Then Pearl Harbor happened. Thomas enlisted in January 1942. Told the recruiter he knew machines, knew how to fix things. The Army tested him. Gave him mechanical aptitude exams, math problems, spatial reasoning. Thomas passed everything with near-perfect scores. "You're going to be an engineer," the recruiter said. "Combat engineer." Thomas didn't know what that meant at the time, but he learned. Combat engineers built bridges under fire, cleared minefields while being shot at, demolished obstacles that blocked advances, fixed roads that artillery had destroyed. It was dangerous work. More engineers died than anyone liked to admit, but it was also exactly what Thomas was good at. Solving problems, under pressure, with limited resources. By 1945, Thomas had built 17 bridges, some small, some large, all of them functional. He'd learned to work with whatever materials were available. Steel beams from bombed buildings, railroad ties, telephone poles, even, on one memorable occasion, the hull of a wrecked tank repurposed as a structural support. His superiors called him creative. His fellow engineers called him crazy. But they also trusted him. Because Thomas's bridges always worked. They might not look pretty, might not meet any engineering standard taught in textbooks, but they held. And in war, that was all anyone cared about. What Thomas didn't know, what he was about to discover, was that everything he'd learned from his father, from the mill, from 2 years of combat engineering, was about to be tested in a way that would redefine what impossible meant. Because building a bridge in 48 hours with salvaged materials over a 70-yard river was one thing. Building it so it could support 3 divisions and their equipment was something else entirely. The wreckage that became a bridge. Keating assembled his engineering platoon at the riverbank. 40 men, trained, experienced. But none of them had built a bridge this size this fast. "Listen up," Keating said. "We have 48 hours to span this river. We don't have pontoons. We don't have enough steel. We don't have the materials for a standard bridge." The men looked at each other. One sergeant, a man named Kowalski, spoke up. "So what do we have, sir?" Keating pointed at the destroyed bridge, at the wreckage jutting from the water. "We have that." Silence. "You want us to build a bridge out of a destroyed bridge?" Kowalski asked. "Not out of it," Keating said. "On it. The pilings are still there, the foundation. Some of the support structure is intact underwater. We salvage what we can, reinforce it, and build on top of it." Another engineer, Corporal Ellis, shook his head. "Sir, with respect, that's insane. We don't know what's structurally sound down there. Could collapse the moment we put weight on it." "You're right," Keating said. "It could, but it's the only option we have." He pulled out a sketch, rough, drawn on the back of a requisition form, but clear enough. "We're not building a full bridge. We're building a hybrid. Use the old pilings as anchor points. Run cables between them. Build a suspended platform. Light, flexible, strong enough for vehicles but not so heavy it collapses the supports." The men studied the sketch. Kowalski frowned. Sir, I've never seen a design like that." "Because it doesn't exist," Keating said. "We're making it up as we go." Ellis looked skeptical. "And you think this'll hold tanks?" "Light tanks, maybe, if we do it right. And if we don't? Then it collapses and we start over. But we don't have time to start over. So we do it right the first time." Keating could see the doubt in their faces. But he also saw something else. Trust. They'd worked with him before. seen his bridges hold, seen his improvised solutions work when nothing else would. They didn't believe this was possible, but they believed in him. And in war, that was enough. "All right," Kowalski said. "What do you need us to do?" Keating divided the work. Half the platoon would dive into the river, cold, dangerous, to assess what remained of the old bridge underwater. The other half would scavenge materials, steel beams from destroyed buildings, cable from downed telephone lines, wood from whatever they could find. It was a scavenger hunt, with a deadline, and lives depending on it. The first dive team went into the water at 0900 hours. They came back up 15 minutes later, shivering, gasping, but with information. "3 pilings still intact, sir," one of them reported. 2 more damaged, but probably usable. There's a lot of wreckage down there. Twisted steel, broken concrete. Could be salvaged if we can cut it free. "Do it," Keating said. For the next 6 hours, the engineering platoon worked in shifts, diving, cutting, hauling debris from the river bottom. By 1500 hours, they'd pulled up enough steel to start building. Not much, but enough. Maybe. Keating stood at the riverbank, looking at the pile of salvaged materials, doing calculations that still didn't add up the way they should. But they were closer. And in 48 hours, close would have to be good enough. What Keating didn't realize yet, what he couldn't have known, was that the hardest part wasn't going to be the engineering. It was going to be convincing everyone that his impossible design would actually work. Building something from nothing. By nightfall, on day 1, Keating's platoon had laid the foundation. Not a traditional foundation. Something stranger. They'd anchored cables to the 3 intact pilings, run them across the river at angles that distributed weight, in ways no engineering manual described. Then they'd begun layering steel beams on top of the cables, creating a framework. Light. Flexible. Held together by tension rather than mass. It looked fragile, like a strong wind could blow it apart. But Keating knew that appearances didn't matter. Physics did. And the physics barely worked. The problem was convincing everyone else. Colonel Harrison visited the site at 2000 hours, stood at the riverbank, stared at the half-built structure. "Lieutenant, what the hell am I looking at?" "A suspension bridge, sir. Modified. It looks like a pile of scrap held together with hope." "Accurate description, sir." Harrison didn't smile. "Will it hold?" Keating looked at the bridge, at the cables, at the beams that were still being positioned. "Yes, sir." "You're sure?" Keating wanted to say yes, wanted to sound confident. But he was an engineer, and engineers didn't deal in certainties. They dealt in probabilities. 80% sure, sir." Harrison's expression darkened. 80%. "Yes, sir. So there's a 20% chance it collapses the moment we put a vehicle on it." "Yes, sir." Harrison was quiet. "Then, I need better than 80%, Lieutenant." "I understand, sir. But with the materials we have and the time we have, 80% is the best I can give you." Harrison stared at the bridge again, then at Keating. "If this fails, men die." "Yes, sir. And you're willing to risk that?" It wasn't a question, but Keating answered anyway. "Sir, men die if we don't cross this river. The Germans are fortifying. Every hour we wait, our casualties go up. This bridge, even at 80%, is better odds than waiting." Harrison studied him. "You really believe that?" "Yes, sir." "All right, Lieutenant. Finish your bridge. But if it fails, it's on you." "Understood, sir." Harrison left. Keating stood alone at the riverbank, staring at the half-built structure, feeling the weight of what he'd just committed to. 80%. He'd said 80%. But honestly, it was closer to 60, maybe 50. He didn't know, couldn't know, because what he was building didn't exist in any textbook. No one had tested it. No one had proven it would work. He was guessing. Educated, guessing, but still guessing. And if he guessed wrong, people would die. Kowalski walked over. "Sir, you good?" Keating nodded, not because he felt good, but because showing doubt would spread to the men, and they needed to believe this would work. "Yeah," Keating said. "Let's keep building." The night that tested everything. They worked through the night. Floodlights powered by generators illuminated the site. The sound of hammers, saws, and welding torches echoed across the river. Keating didn't sleep. Couldn't. Every beam placement mattered. Every cable tension adjustment changed the load distribution. One mistake, one miscalculation, and the entire structure could fail. By 0300 hours, they'd completed 70% of the span. The bridge stretched from the near bank almost to the far side. Just 20 more yards. But those 20 yards were the hardest, because that's where the damaged pilings were, the ones that might not hold. Keating climbed onto the structure, carefully, testing each step. The bridge swayed under his weight. Not much, but enough to feel unstable. He reached the end, looked down at the last piling, cracked concrete, exposed rebar, structurally compromised, but it was all they had. "Can we reinforce it?" Keating called back. Ellis climbed out with more cable. "We can wrap it, add tension support, but it's still going to be the weak point." "Will it hold?" Ellis looked at the piling, at the crack running down its side. "I don't know, sir. 50-50. 50-50. On top of the 80% Keating had promised Harrison, which meant the real odds of this bridge working were maybe 40%. At best. Keating made a decision. "Wrap it. Add as much support as we can. Then we test it." "Test it how, sir?" "We drive a jeep across." Ellis stared at him. "Sir, if it fails during a test, we lose a jeep. If it fails when the division crosses, we lose lives. I'd rather lose the jeep." Ellis nodded slowly. "Yes, sir." They worked for 3 more hours, wrapping cable around the damaged piling, adding cross-bracing, reinforcing every weak point they could find. By 0600 hours, the bridge was complete. It didn't look like any bridge Keating had ever seen. It looked like something made by someone who'd never studied engineering. Makeshift, improvised, held together by tension and luck. But it was done. "Get a jeep," Keating said. Kowalski brought one, parked it at the bridge entrance, engine idling. "Who's driving?" Kowalski asked. Keating looked at him, then at the bridge, then back. "I am. Sir, it's my bridge, my design. If it fails, I should be the one on it." Kowalski wanted to argue. Keating could see it, but he didn't, because he understood. This wasn't about bravery. It was about responsibility. Keating climbed into the jeep, gripped the wheel. His hands were shaking, not from fear, from exhaustion, from 40 hours of non-stop work, from the knowledge that the next 2 minutes would either prove he was right or prove he was a fool. He put the jeep in gear and drove onto the bridge. What Keating didn't know, what he couldn't have predicted, was that the test drive wouldn't just tell him if the bridge worked. It would tell him something else entirely. Something about limits, trust, and the fine line between genius and disaster. The test that proved everything. The jeep rolled onto the bridge, slowly, 5 miles per hour. Keating felt every vibration through the steering wheel. The bridge swayed, side to side. Not much, just enough to feel wrong. He kept driving. 10 yards, 15. The swaying increased. The cables creaked. Keating's foot hovered over the brake, ready to stop if anything felt like it was failing. 20 yards, halfway across. The bridge was holding. Barely, but holding. Keating looked ahead, at the damaged piling, getting closer. That was the test. If it held there, it would hold anywhere. 30 yards. The piling was right below him now. Keating felt the bridge dip, just slightly. The cables tensioned. Metal groaned. But nothing broke. Nothing failed. He kept driving. 40 yards. 50. The far bank was close now. So close. 60 yards. The bridge held. Keating reached the far side. Drove off the span. Stopped. Sat there. Breathing. For the first time in 48 hours, he let himself believe that maybe, just maybe, this impossible thing he'd built would actually work. Behind him, on the near bank, his platoon erupted. Cheering. Shouting. Kowalski was jumping up and down like a kid. Keating climbed out of the jeep. Looked back at the bridge. It was still standing. Still swaying slightly in the wind. But standing. Colonel Harrison appeared beside him. "Well, Lieutenant, looks like your 80% was accurate." Keating almost laughed. "Yes, sir." "How much weight can it handle?" Keating had done the calculations. Multiple times. Jeeps, supply trucks, light vehicles, no problem. Heavier trucks, loaded. Should be fine. Tanks. He paused. Light tanks only, and one at a time. Anything heavier, and I can't guarantee it. Fair enough. Get some rest, Lieutenant. You've earned it. Thank you, sir. But I'd like to stay. Monitor the crossing. Make sure nothing fails. Harrison nodded. Suit yourself. He walked away. Keating stood on the far bank, watching as the first convoy began to cross. Supply trucks, moving slowly, one at a time. The bridge swayed with each vehicle, but it held. Every single time. It held. By noon, 300 vehicles had crossed. By evening, over 1,000. Infantry, artillery, support units, all of them moving east, continuing the advance that had been stopped by one destroyed bridge. Keating watched it all, exhausted, barely able to stand, but unable to leave, because this bridge, this impossible, improvised, jury-rigged structure, was his. And as long as it was still standing, he needed to be there, just in case. What Keating didn't know, what he'd only learn later, was that his bridge wouldn't just last for the crossing. It would last for 6 more weeks, until the war ended. And that more than just one division would use it. 3 divisions, thousands of men, tens of thousands of vehicles, all crossing on a bridge that shouldn't have existed. The bridge that changed doctrine. Keating's bridge became famous, not officially, but among engineers. Word spread through the Corps of Engineers about the lieutenant who'd built a span in 48 hours with nothing but salvaged materials and improvisation. Other units started using his techniques: hybrid bridges, suspended platforms, salvaged foundations. What Keating had done out of desperation became a new approach, a new way of thinking about rapid bridge construction. After the war, the Army commissioned a study, analyzing Keating's bridge, the design, the materials, the load capacity. They found that his improvised structure was actually more efficient than standard pontoon bridges in certain conditions. Lighter, faster to build, more adaptable. The study's conclusion: Lieutenant Keating's design represents a paradigm shift in field engineering. Recommend incorporation into training doctrine. And they did. By 1947, elements of Keating's bridge design were being taught at engineering school, not as a replacement for traditional methods, but as an alternative for situations where speed mattered more than perfection. Keating never knew. He'd left the Army in 1946, went home to New York, back to the paper mill. This time, not as maintenance, as chief engineer. He spent 35 years there, designing systems, solving problems, improvising solutions when equipment failed. Just like his father, he never talked about the bridge, never mentioned the 48 hours that had redefined what was possible. When people asked about the war, he'd just say, "Built some bridges, kept the advance moving," and leave it at that. The man who believed in possible Thomas Keating retired in 1981, died in 2003. His obituary mentioned his work at the paper mill, his 40 years of service, his family. One line, just one, mentioned his military service. Served as combat engineer, European theater, 1943-1945. That was all. No mention of the bridge, of the impossible deadline, of the design that became doctrine. But somewhere in an army archive, there's a file, technical drawings, load calculations, photographs of Keating's bridge, still referenced by engineers today. Not because it was perfect, but because it proved something fundamental. That impossible is just a word, a limit we impose on ourselves, and that sometimes the best solutions don't come from following the rules. They come from understanding when the rules don't apply anymore, when the situation demands something new, something improvised, something that shouldn't work but does anyway, because someone refused to accept that it couldn't be done. The legacy built in 48 hours. Today, combat engineers still study Keating's bridge, not the specific design, but the approach, the mindset, the willingness to look at a problem and see solutions that don't exist in any manual. It's called adaptive engineering. Building with what you have, not what you wish you had. Keating didn't invent it, but he perfected it in 48 hours, under impossible pressure, with lives depending on getting it right. Every military bridge built under fire since 1945 owes something to that moment. To one lieutenant who stood at a riverbank, looked at a destroyed bridge, and refused to accept that it couldn't be rebuilt. Keating never got a medal for the bridge, never received recognition beyond a brief commendation in his service record. But the bridge stood. For 6 weeks, through thousands of crossings, until the war ended and it wasn't needed anymore. Then it was dismantled, salvaged for other projects. Nothing remains of it now. But the idea, the understanding that impossible is just another problem waiting to be solved, that remains. In every combat engineer who builds under fire, in every impossible deadline that somehow gets met, in every bridge that shouldn't exist, but does. Because one man, 70 years ago, proved something the world needed to learn. That limits are temporary. That impossible is negotiable. And that sometimes the most important thing an engineer can do is refuse to believe that something can't be done.